Hello and welcome to the Resilience Movement podcast. It's great to have you here. And I have a wonderful guest today. Toby Whittington has 30 years experience as a social entrepreneur and has worked as a living statue, a fashion designer, founded a charity, worked in urban farming as a recycled plastic product designer. I nearly got my tongue tied there. Toby was diagnosed with 47XXY and Klinefelter syndrome in early adulthood and turned what could have been quite a struggle into a journey of self-love, acceptance, and purpose. He has now come out as a proud intersex person and become an accredited sexologist and relationship coach and is studying a master's in counselling. As a sex and relationships coach, Toby is using his lived experience to inform his work, guiding others to grow whole person relationships with themselves and others that are rooted in compassion, authenticity, and emotional integrity. And welcome, Toby. I'm looking forward to our discussion. How are you?
Thanks, Donna. Lovely introduction. I'm really well, thanks.
Fantastic. I love having guests on the podcast that can bring different story, different journey for their own, self-discovery or wherever it's led them in life. And our listeners are all over the world. So I have some wonderful questions, but I'd like you to just do a little introduction of yourself, how you'd like to introduce yourself and whole person relationships. And then I've got some great questions for you.
Well, the introduction you've just given is pretty good. I established my coaching business, Whole Person Relationships, sort of at the end of 2023. And then I spent the entire year of 2024 training to become an accredited sex coach. And I started working with clients in my self-love programs in early 2024. And I've had quite a few clients now who have gone through my 5 or 6 weeks of self-love training.
Fantastic.
And I was doing a master's in sexology, which I now have a graduate certificate in since early this year. And in January, I started doing a master's in counselling as well to back that up.
A lifelong learner,
Yes, definitely.
which
I've always been very much an autodidactic, so that means self-teaching, self-learning, as
yeah.
I actually had learning difficulties in high school and in primary school, which I've now realised is to do with my diagnosis with Klinefelter syndrome.
Right, right. And we're going to go into that a little bit. But I love the fact that we talk about self-directed learning, and I'm in the adult education field as well and have been for over 20 years, and self-directed learners. And I'm a lifelong learner. I love to get my hands on plenty of books. I recall a friend of mine and we were talking about understanding a bit of addiction and so forth. And I remember saying to her, and this was years ago when I was very uneducated on addiction, I said, I don't understand addiction. And she goes, You've got an addiction? I said, No, I haven't. And she said, Oh, so you can go through an airport without getting a book, can you? And I went, Well, no, but you know, I digress and I can do that.
Yep.
So,
Well,
Toby, sorry,
I
what
was
were you
going,
going to
I was going to say, touching on lifelong learning, my first influence with lifelong learning was the relationship I had with my grandmother when I was a kid, and we would spend many afternoons sitting in her sunroom drinking tea and talking about the root of words, the Latin of words, and the meaning of words. And she was doing summer university right up into her late 80s. So I
Wow.
come from a family of lifelong learners.
They must be such beautiful memories.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I have 10 questions for you. Shall we dive in?
great.
Okay. So, firstly, let me say thank you. Thank you very much for being a guest on the Resilience Movement podcast. And so, Toby, for those who are meeting you for the first time, how did your journey as a coach and advocate for whole person relationships begin?
So it really came out of my diagnosis with Klinefelter syndrome when I was 32, 15 years ago. Um, I was trying to have children at the time with my then wife, and I discovered that I was born sterile. And when they looked at my sperm count, they also looked at my blood, and they found an extra chromosome in my blood samples, which was 47XXY. And it took about 8 or 9 years for me to realize that 47XXY is actually an intersex condition or intersex variation. And when I found that out around 2017 or 2018, I started to become quite interested with the relationship and my relationship between biological sex and gender and sexuality.
Mhm.
And I started to get quite engaged with the sex positive space. There were some festivals and events and things in Perth at that time to engage with. And that really led me to feeling like I had something to contribute in that space and wanted to become a coach. Didn't really know how to go about it. And it wasn't until after COVID that I decided to do studies and got into sexology through study. So it's kind of happened kind of organically for me in lots of
Mhm.
ways. But now, yeah, I'm now working as a coach and I've set up the business.
And what's it like having that, finding that passion and purpose for yourself?
I think I've always been pretty driven to help people. Um, Even before my diagnosis, I've always been driven to do something about the environment through my art practice or through performance and through my
Yeah.
fashion label. And it really was being diagnosed with Klinefelter syndrome that led me to set up a charity and help people that way, help long term unemployed people. And so, yeah, I think it's been a kind of logical progression in lots of ways to want to help people with more interpersonal issues and problems as I've developed through my own life and my own interests have changed.
Right. And tell me a little bit about your charity.
The charity was called Green World Revolution, and we set it up in 2012. Actually, my mother is a co-founder, and she's the chairperson, and I was the CEO of the organisation. Between 2012 and 2020, I've worked personally with over 500 long-term unemployed people and created 25 employment opportunities for people on our urban farm and developed a lot of urban farming projects in Perth. So really pioneered the Perth microgreen growing industry
Hmm.
and selling microgreens direct to restaurants. And of course, there's a link kind of through that into health and wellness. And so there's a lot of co-interest there, I think.
What are some of the, I guess, highlights of that time when you were helping people? And I mean, getting people, long-term unemployed people into jobs is a great, it's a great success for them. What would you say are some of the highlights for you throughout that journey?
I think for me personally, really working with people one on one in a case management capacity and working with people, observing their behavior and working almost like an OT in lots of ways, observing people's behavior and then helping them to change their behavior or change the way they hold things or do things physically. And I think I learned a lot of those skills when I was a living statue for 10 years observing people.
Right.
I've been able to transfer that information into other experiences. So it was really great for me to work with some pretty hard cases of people who had been unemployed for like 12 months and up to even 6 years,
Mm.
and to work one on one with them and then see them really flourish and actually see them go out and get jobs external from our organisation or to have employment created for them within our organisation. It was very fulfilling to have that role.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
I think I really kind of cut my teeth on mentoring people, and I now work as an employment mentor with an NDIS provider. So
Yeah.
had a lot of experience with that as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right. Well, can you describe a whole person relationship and what that means to you and why this matters, why this concept matters more than ever?
Yes, I think. I really developed the concept of a whole person relationship in thinking about the types of relationships that we have in our life. And I've developed my own model for the 6 types of relationships that we have in our life. And primary to all of those relationships is this notion of self-love and self-compassion and self-acceptance. And that is a primary relationship that we have with ourselves. And I believe that when we are fulfilled with that self-loving relationship,
Mm.
then all those other 6 types of relationships that we have in our lives become a lot more fulfilling and a lot easier actually to have them, and a lot more satisfying to have them. So
Yeah.
the concept of a whole person relationship is to really foster that wholeness within ourselves first, and then be able to actually transfer that into our other relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 56 now, and that's a concept. Self-love is not something I ever heard growing up. It's not something my mum ever talked about. Um, it was always about putting other people first, and now there's so much more understanding of what self-love is and what that looks like, and I think that that's really important to teach, the next generation and the generation after that, is how important it is. So thank you. You've spoken about your own journey of self-love and acceptance. What was your turning point when you began to see yourself through a more compassionate lens?
I've been on this journey of self-love for a really long time. It started when I was a kid. Um, and I remember my late stepfather gave my mum a copy of Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, which was full of affirmations. Um, and that got me really interested with this notion about, what we think we become. That's been a running theme in my life that I've explored at different times. I think, though, having the diagnosis with Klinefelter's and really like that really shook my world and my reality of what I knew about myself, and really forced me to discover who I am and how I want to identify.
Hmm.
So that's been over the last 15 years. It's been a really long journey myself with, learning to love myself very seriously, and learning to accept myself, and learning to love the body I'm in. My body is quite different from other people's in different ways, and that's been, a real journey for me to create that sort of acceptance, and then create, compassion and empathy for myself through those beliefs. So I've taken my experiences over a number of years with learning about self-love and put that into my programs now, so I'm able to facilitate that in others over a 5 or 6 week period, whereas for me it kind of rolled out over a 7 or 8 year period.
So for someone who's like says, what does it look like to have self-love? And I mean, I know that that's quite a big thing. It's not, one thing that you can do, but what does it generally start to look like for you when you are acting compassionate towards yourself and you are giving yourself more self-love than previously?
Look, I really like to use metaphor to describe things, and the metaphor I use for this is like the pilot light on a gas system. Um, if you don't have a pilot light burning, and we can see that pilot light as our own self-love. If you don't have a pilot light burning, then one, you're reliant on external sources to come into your life to get your flame lit. And
Mm,
when someone does come in and lights your flame, it can burn really bright and strong and amazing. You're in a great relationship, or you're in a great job, or you're feeling satisfied with external validation. But then when those things shift and change and those relationships move, and perhaps that relationship ends with the person that's lit you up, if you
yeah.
don't have the pilot light, you can get crushed to the core. You can get really heartbroken and feel very empty and not whole at all. And it can take a really long time for you to get back to feeling warm inside again. And often you're looking for another opportunity for external validation to try and fill that hole that's within.
Mm,
Whereas if you have a pilot light of self-love burning away, When a relationship comes along into your life, it adds to that pilot light. It lights up straight away, but it's not all to do with the relationship. It's also to do with what you're feeding yourself and burning the pilot light. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when a relationship ends or changes or moves away and that person is no longer in your life, you have a pilot light burning. Sure, the flame is diminished. Sure, you feel the feelings of loss, loss of love. That person maybe doesn't want to be in your life, and it's sad. But you have that pilot light burning, and you're
Yeah.
feeding that pilot light. So you're not really broken to the core, because you can start to understand that actually you don't need that person to fulfill the love that you have in your life. That relationships are added to a passion that is burning within. And so, not just relationships, but a lot of people, when we think about self love, they think about what I call self loving behaviors. So, a self loving behavior might be running yourself a nice warm bath, or cooking yourself a nice meal, or taking some time for mindfulness practice or meditation or that sort of thing, or taking yourself out to dinner or the movies or whatever you want to do to self-care. So those
Yeah.
self-loving behaviors on their own actually do not create self-love. If you have a pilot light of self-love burning, those behaviors can really feed it and make it grow more. And particularly if you've had a loss in a relationship or in your life, then those behaviors can really help your pilot light stay lit. But
Mm.
if you don't have the pilot light of self-love, I don't think it really matters how many hot baths you want to have. At the end of the day, you're coming home to essentially, an empty house within, an empty space within that you're trying to fill with these activities external. So
Yeah.
I really see self-love and that pilot light as being kind of essential for us, and that's what makes us whole people. And we no longer need external validation to define our worth or our
Mm.
value.
I love that analogy. Thank you. That was really really easy to connect with, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Many of us carry stories that shape how we view connection and intimacy. What are some of the beliefs you had to challenge in order to form healthier relationships, starting with the one you have with yourself?
Gosh, that's a good question. Um, yeah, I think, and maybe it's cliche to say, I'm worthy of love, but the antithesis of that belief is I'm not worthy, and that's something we need to actually challenge in ourselves. If we're walking around thinking I'm not worthy of love, that becomes our realities, and it becomes we're not worthy of anything in our lives.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, I had to challenge some of those negative thoughts and beliefs that I've had built up over my life, particularly around, um, learning to love my body that I'm walking in and learning to accept it the way it is with its differences.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been definitely a challenge for me, and I think it's a challenge for anyone who's embarking on a self-love journey, because we have to actually change our core beliefs. And we do that through, or the way I do that with people is through changing how they think about themselves and changing the thoughts that we have.
Yeah, and that's not always easy, is it?
Well, it's challenging. It's definitely, I see clients in the first week of my programs get pretty challenged by the practice that I teach.
Yeah.
And the practice itself is about between 5 and 10 seconds twice a day for the first week. And that 5 or 10 seconds, yeah, can be really tough for people.
Mm. Just very new concepts that people aren't used to doing, and also challenging people's thoughts. And do you find also their language, the way they talk to themselves?
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what we call internal narrative.
Mm.
And often internal narrative might start for us from a very early age. People can pinpoint when they picked up their negative internal narrative, and often can picture everything that happened at that moment, whether that was someone else bringing it to them and imposing their ideas of who they should be, or they've picked it up from some other source. But they can remember very clearly when that negative narrative started.
Yeah.
Again, I use another metaphor or analogy for this is like our minds are like a hill, yeah, and our consciousness is like a blanket of snow over the hill.
Hmm.
So we have toboggans that slide down the hill, and those toboggans are our thoughts. So the toboggan, as it goes down the hill with the snow, it makes a groove in the snow into our consciousness. So the more thoughts you have on one particular subject, the deeper those grooves are going to become.
Yeah.
So if that thought is negative self-loathing and negative self-belief, then the groove created in your consciousness for that negative thought is going to become very strong over time, and actually can get to the point where all the other toboggans that you're sending down the hill, it's easier for them to line up with that deep groove than it is to create their own groove. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
even a thought that starts out as sort of positive can quickly become self-negative because
Mm.
it's falling into that pattern.
Yeah.
And so I work with people to identify those narratives and thoughts and beliefs that we've built up, and then using affirmations, craft new thoughts that are positive and use it on repetition so that people are counteracting those deep grooves and creating a new positive groove that becomes stronger than the negative one. So there's some
Fantastic.
discipline once you have identified the thoughts that you're having and identified the narrative that you're having that you want to change, crafted a new thought, and then the discipline to actually purposely use that new thought all the time is what makes it happen. Because, I mean, some people might have an experience of negative narrative forming maybe when they're 5 or 6. And if
Mm.
they're in their 30s or 40s or older, that's a lot of thoughts they've had. That's a deep groove that they've created. But because we know of brain plasticity, meaning that brains can change and do change, you can counteract those thoughts by having this new thought a lot. And it's the discipline of doing that with purpose.
You say that, the brain can change, and there's one of those books that impacted my life, which is the brain that changes.
Yeah.
Um, I just thought that when I started learning about neuroplasticity, it just blew my mind. It was quite so thought-provoking, and I looked at things very, very differently once I started to understand that. So
And I think through changing our thoughts, then we change our behaviors. But
yeah.
also, I mean, someone told me this years ago when I was working on an urban farm and working with unemployed people. I met a fellow who was doing mentoring with youth, and we had a great connection. We were talking a lot about behavioural change because we were working in much the same field. And he said, there's a perception that behavioural change takes a long time, but it's actually not true.
Mm.
Um, he said that like he has all of his young people streaming in the front door of their office and going to the front desk to sign in at his workplace every day. And one day he puts a desk across the walkway, and then the next morning the people walk in, they walk around it. Now they've just simply changed their behaviour because the
Yeah.
environment, and they're walking around it, walking around it. If you moved it again, they would walk in a different way. But
Yeah.
what it illustrates is that behaviour actually can change quite quickly. And there's those factors of looking at the environment, the physical location of things happening, who's in that environment, and when you bring about interventions, and then also what you're actually thinking about when you're doing those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's some of
Fantastic.
the elements that I work with people.
Excellent. Um, your diagnosis with Klinefelter syndrome came with its own layers of self-discovery. So, without diving too much into medical specifics, what did that moment teach you about identity and resilience?
Well, first of all, I might say at this point that I was given the diagnosis over the telephone at like 10 past 5 on a Thursday afternoon, had my whole life blown apart. And I must say, I learned a lot in that moment about why we shouldn't have diagnosis on the telephone, because
Mm.
that was
Tell me
horrendous
more about that.
support. Well, I was rung up out of the blue at 10 past 5 and said, that they'd found that I'm completely sterile. They looked at my blood. I have an extra chromosome. I have a thing called Klinefelter syndrome. I may need to get support for it. Good luck. And yeah, I was just like blown away. But it was 5:30 in the afternoon, and no supports are open or anything for that. And
And
so,
just a very blasé
yeah,
diagnosis and thanks very much. And
it's kind of matter of fact. So, yeah,
wow.
that was quite a shock to have my life changed like that. And yeah, I think at the time, I mean, I had to find my own support. Um, I was hooked up with a specialist who looked at my testosterone levels, and this is delving a bit into the medicalisation of it. However, it's a part of the story. Um, is that I don't produce my own testosterone, and it was very low, and it was actually impacting my life, which I didn't know at the time. I was so tired all the time as a
Mhm.
result. So I've been on testosterone replacement therapy for 15 years. Absolutely, physically and mentally changed my life for the better. Um,
Wow. And
stopped.
how long did that take to for you to notice changes? Like you're now diagnosed and you're now prescribed testosterone. And so what did you start to notice in the way of time frames and maybe changes in yourself?
Well, this is really fascinating. You see, when I was 13, I started to describe to people that I felt like something was missing in my head. And I described it right up through to my 30s. I would describe to people that I felt like it was a bit like when someone's standing behind you and you can feel their presence, but no one is there. It was
Mhm.
more like I could feel the absence of someone or something in my head. And I
Right.
thought I was going through puberty, but I've actually discovered now that I was having what's called a truncated puberty. So it started and stopped very suddenly
Okay.
because of my condition. So um, when I had the testosterone tested, my levels of testosterone were about 3.5 units, and I should have been between 12 and a half and 32 units on the scale they were using then. So
Wow.
they gave me a shot of testosterone, and I took the bus back to my home studio where I had a little fashion label I was operating. And literally within 2 to 3 hours of my first shot of testosterone, I remember being on the sewing machine, and that feeling that I'd had for my entire adult life and all of my teenage years disappeared and has never returned.
Wow.
So, as far as timing goes, yeah, I felt effects within 3 hours of having my first ever shot of testosterone. And then 2 weeks later, I nearly fell off a chair in an arts meeting I was at because I had biceps for the first time in my life. I didn't realize it had happened, and I brushed my hand by my arm and went, oh my gosh, I've got bicep muscles have appeared. And so the testosterone actually created a puberty-like experience, which lasted 8 years.
Wow.
And I think that's paralleling with my then interest coming through that puberty experience and my then interest in sex and sexuality and sexology and things, because I've had that experience as an adult between the age of 32 and 40. I've experienced puberty basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Hormones are amazing, right?
uh, well,
So effectual. And yeah, you would know this, eh?
I can tell you because when I first went on my going through menopause, when I first went on estrogen, um, I noticed a difference within 3 days.
Yeah,
And I felt like beforehand, I felt like a crazy person. Like it was the worst feeling ever. And I let it go. I suffered for 2 years, which felt like 10 years at the time. But once I started taking something that I just had this story in my head that I shouldn't take, it changed everything. So
yeah,
3 hours for you to feel different.
yeah. And I think there's some parallels between late stage male puberty and with testosterone and menopause actually, because um, when I was with my second wife, I was at the end of my 8 year puberty experience around 40, and she was coming through the end of perimenopause, and we would have hot sweats together and hot flushes and have our fans out, and there's a lot of similarities in the experiences we were having with that. It was quite amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not fun at the time, though, I'm sure.
I think as well, specialists don't really know what's going to happen to you.
No.
And I think like I went into testosterone therapy kind of blindly, having been told by the endocrinologist, the specialist, this is what you do. And I accepted that. And then anytime I'd turn up and tell him the things that had happened, he was furiously making notes. And I started to realize after a few years that he didn't have a clue what was going to happen to me personally.
Wow.
And I think even now, like with menopause and different things happening where people are taking hormones, doctors and specialists kind of know what they do in the ballpark, but they don't really know what they're going to do to you, the individual. So,
No, and they lack a lot of empathy and understanding.
yeah. Well, that's also, I mean, coming back to having a relationship with yourself that is full of love and self-compassion and so forth, is that going through these transitions in our lives is so much, I think, better when we're self-supportive, and having that strong self-loving relationship brings that self-support.
Yeah, look, when I'm suffering, one of my self-love acts is I take myself to bed. I
Yeah,
don't care what time it is. I have been in bed at 6:30 at night because my body says you just need to rest.
yeah.
And if I'm not in bed, I'm not resting. So, because I struggle to do that. But
I think that's part of the narrative here is learning to self-love is then giving you a reason to kind of listen to yourself more and listen to
mm,
what your body needs more and be really cognizant of that, and also not feel kind of guilty about then acting on those behaviors or then acting on that stuff that's good for you. I
mm,
think without self-love, sometimes we can be so focused on what everyone else is doing that maybe we forget or we don't want to acknowledge what is important for us. We don't put ourselves first.
and it
And
took menopause for me to change that, let me tell you.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't. I also don't think that's selfish. I think, like you mentioned earlier, growing up, that self-love wasn't a topic of conversation or acknowledged, and I think in
No.
lots of ways it's had a bit of a bad rap historically as being selfish.
Yes.
Um, in taking yourself first. But in order for us to actually give to others and make a contribution in the world
Mm.
and keep up our jobs and keep up our busy schedules and things, we actually have to look after ourselves first to be able to do those things, because otherwise we can't do those things.
Yeah.
I think,
Totally agree. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
I
a
don't,
it's
I
a
don't think it's
journey.
selfish in a negative way. I think it's selfish in a positive way that gives us then the impetus and energy to help others.
Yeah, and you are right about the word selfish. I need to if I need to be selfish right now, that shouldn't be a negative word. It shouldn't have a negative meaning. It should actually be, well, I do need to put myself first. And I wish I learnt that sooner, but I didn't. And so now I talk to my daughters about it, and I talk to my son about it. So
Yeah, I have a heuristic which I live by, which my mother had gave me actually, and that is that um, I and extended we have the right and responsibility to reach our potential, but not at the expense of others or ourselves. And so, as a heuristic with this notion, it's not just our right to reach our potential, but it's also our responsibility. We're the ones that have to do it. No one
mm,
else is going to help us reach. People help, but no one's going to make us reach our potential other than us, and not at the expense of others or ourselves. It keeps that in balance and in check that, you really do need to look after yourself
mm,
first and reach your potential.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I've got, as someone who works with others on deep emotional and relational healing, what do you believe is one of the biggest myths people hold about love and partnership?
Wow, great question. I think that the biggest myth about love and partnership is that love is scarce. And I believe that love is infinite, and that um, like the love scarcity model that we often see, particularly around romantic love, is
Mhm.
that if I give you some of my love and then I want to love someone else, I have to take some of your love that I've given you and give that to them so you'll have less love from me. And I think this is a total myth. And, as someone, if you have children and parents and a pet in your life,
Yeah.
you love all of these people and animals. Yeah.
Yes.
And so loving a parent, does that then take away from the love of the child? Or if
No.
you have another child and love them as well, are you taking love from the first child to give to the second? Or are you simply generating the love to love each of these people?
You've just brought up a memory for me. It was funny when my first grandchild was born. She's now 18, so a long time ago. She was born, and my daughter's partner at the time, he said to my daughter, "Your mum loves you too much."
Right.
And
Okay.
and I understand why he said that. I love in a very different way to what he experienced as a child. And so now I have these grandchildren that I love these grandchildren. They just, light up my life. And in fact, I actually say um, I I feel a bit I felt a bit strange about something. When your children fall over and scrape their knee, you feel a pain. As a mum, I feel a pain. I don't know if that's how it is for everybody, but and now if my grandchildren fall over and scrape their knee, I feel the pain. And I'm like, this is not supposed to happen. I should be off the hook now.
But isn't that an indication that you love them?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's what you do with that in the situation. I think that's more important. It's not a sense of being off the hook from loving your grandkids.
No, off the hook from feeling the pain.
I I don't know. I think that that's just an indication of the love you have.
Yeah, and it is, and I'm very proud of the deep love I feel for family is very important to me. So, um,
I think we have a lot of myths around love. Like what you're saying there is the partner said, your mum loves you too much. Maybe they're confusing love and ownership.
mm,
You know? And I think we can often confuse those things, and we can feel like we have some proprietary ownership over someone else's life because we love them, and they should therefore do what we think they should do.
mm,
But we have to start to ask, well, is that really love? Because if love is unconditional, then you're actually okay with the other person doing things that you perhaps wouldn't do. You're still going to
yeah,
love
yeah,
unconditional. But I think as well, I mean, if we're talking about external love for others, and that's coming from a space of not loving yourself. It's
mm,
very difficult to have unconditional love for someone else when you're missing the love for yourself. You don't have unconditional love for yourself. So that
yeah,
relationship between how we love others and how we love ourselves is intimately entwined. And I think, the analogy I like around this sort of love scarcity is that love is not pie. With a pie, if I give you half of my pie and then have someone else in my life and I want to give them a quarter of the pie and then someone else comes in and I want to give them half a pie, well, I have to take some of your pie back so I can give them half a pie.
yeah,
That's kind of how we view love, particularly in a romantic sense. But love actually isn't at all like pie. Love is a lot more like like a overflowing fountain or
mm,
a cup full of yummy liquid that's constantly filling all the time. And we're able to offer that to people because we're generating it, and it doesn't take away from our ability to love others.
How
I
I
think
was
that's
raised was you give all the pie away because you don't need any pie,
yeah. So no,
and that was very detrimental to my self-love, to my well-being, for a long time until I understood. And that's how I thought it was supposed to be, right? Until I understood it was different and it should be different. And that's that unlearning behaviors, right?
Yeah, one of the things I talk to people is that kind of emotional capacity. And again, like I just mentioned, a cup uh, full of love. I use that sort of analogy for our emotional capacity, that it's like we have a cup or a vessel inside us that um, fills with emotional experience. And if we have emotional experience that we haven't resolved, which can become trauma in our bodies, the cup is going to fill with that emotion, and some of your capacity to deal with things is going to fill. And if your cup is full of all sorts of things that you haven't dealt with from the past, then you only have the top bit of capacity available to kind of
Mm.
deal with things now. So again, I mean, if you're using that analogy of giving the pie away to everyone else, you're kind of giving your capacity away to deal with things, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I work with people to try and clear some of those emotions and clear those things from the past, so that they have more capacity to deal with things like here and now,
This
rather
isn't
than.
a question that I've written down, but it's a question that's just come up for me is when you're teaching clients to relearn things in a different way, do you find some of the clients they go back into their environment where they learned these behaviors and they learned how things were, and they're trying to do something in a different way that's more healthy for them, that's more aligned with who they want to become, whether that is having more self-love for themselves, more compassion, and being kinder to themselves. Do you have to give them different strategies for when they do go back into the same environment? Because sometimes you can't get away. You can spend less time with people, but not always be completely away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is dissidence. You know, if you've changed your state of mind and then you go back to where you were, you can get a bit of distance going on, where the way you're seeing things now and the way that those things haven't changed, you're kind of like, oh, I'm not quite sure how this resonates anymore.
Mm,
That kind of what you're talking about.
yeah,
I would work with a client to come up with strategies for how to deal with that, but it's very much case by case. It's not something. It's not a one size fits all, because
mm,
everyone's experience is different and everyone's relationships are different, and so the dynamics they're dealing with are different. But definitely, I do talk to people about creating protocols for how to deal with coming to terms with that sort of distance in their life and the
yeah.
relationships that they have in their life. You know, one of the things that sometimes comes up, some of my practices is talking out loud, um, and people can be a bit embarrassed if they've got kids or teenagers or that sort of thing. And I've just said, well, why don't you talk to them about what you're doing, about that you're learning self-love, and that this is the process of learning self-love, and actually bring them into the conversation. Because like if you've got teenage kids, why wait till they're your age to figure that out? Why not
Mm,
school them on self-love now, and bring them into the journey? And so maybe that's a way of kind of dealing with some of that sort of dissidence you might have in your life, is actually to bring people into the conversation of your own transformation, your own
that could
change.
have some beautiful outcomes there, couldn't it? Like bringing people along for the journey. Yeah. Okay. Your work blends coaching and academia. Can you share a bit about your academic pathway and how it's influenced the programs and the framework you now teach?
Yeah. So my academic pathway is quite unusual, because as I mentioned, I had learning difficulties in high school and primary school, and I actually repeated year 12. I was terrible at literature and writing. I never thought that I would be able to go to university, and I actually got into an MBA after COVID with 9 years of management experience. I did 4 units and got a graduate certificate, and realised it was so dry that I didn't want to study it, but I loved academic writing.
Yeah.
Um, and so I wanted to do sexology, but I looked and I didn't have an undergraduate degree. And I got into psychology. I did 3 units of the psychology undergraduate, before actually approaching the sexology department at Curtin University and saying, look, I'm an intersex person and I could come and talk, but I'm also studying to get there eventually. And they told me I couldn't talk and study. And I said, well, if there's an opportunity to study, then I would take that, quite cheekily. And the director of the school there actually offered me a spot in the masters. So I completely skipped having a BA and an undergraduate and went straight into the masters. I did my first 6 months of the sexology masters at the same time, or the first year at the same time as doing sex coaching. So that's had quite a huge influence on my coaching practice.
Yeah.
And I've been able to take the things I'm learning and immediately apply them, which has been really nice. And I think from the other students I've worked with, there are not many of us that kind of had that opportunity to actually be working with clients and immediately apply what we're doing.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's been a really good kind of developmental process for me, is having that academic backing at the same time as physically working with people. Not sure if that
It,
quite answered the question.
oh no, it kind of did. Yeah, it kind of did. And I think that that's a really beautiful process where you can apply it. It's interesting to me that you say you loved the academic writing. When I was doing my Bachelor of Psychology, um, I hate the academic writing. I
I
love the
never,
learning.
yeah, I never thought it would be creative, which is why I kind of resisted it for so long. But then I realized, like, if you have a narrative or a story you want to tell, and then you go out and do the research and you find that the research is backing up the story you want to tell, and so you can write that and reference it all.
Yeah,
And when you get that all worked out and it backs up what you wanted to say based on other people's ideas, wow, it's actually kind of cool.
yeah.
It excited me quite a lot. And I think it kind of validates some of my own theories, in that way, if I can find the validation through referencing other people's work.
Yep. Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
since I started counselling in January, I think has been the most interesting, because as I'm studying different theories, um, I keep noticing all these different techniques which are in the wellness industry that I've come across for years. And in fact, some of them I even use, but I've never known the academic route or the theoretic route from them, because no one really references their work in the wellness industry
No,
like that. And generally, people want to kind of repackage a core theory and call it their own thing and put their own trademark on it. And now I'm like, hang on a minute, you've just repackaged CBT or just stop therapy, or. So it's really interesting. I feel like I kind of have access to the back room suddenly, which I didn't have access to before.
yeah, yeah, fantastic. You've developed several programs around relational wellness. What are some of the core themes you see people struggling with, and how does your work guide them through it?
Well, I've actually developed several programs around the idea of self-love. I have the 30 Days to Self-Love program in 3 different formats.
Hmm.
I do grounded embodiment, erotic embodiment, and then also integration and actualization, which is a 12-week program with the self-love at the beginning. So that's kind of my theme, is working from that core and helping people with that relationship with themselves first, and then going into other relationships. But I also do sex and relationship coaching separately, which is done kind of on a case by case, depending on what people are coming to me with.
Yeah.
I've done quite a lot of men's sex coaching. And I think one of the things that has been quite striking to me working in that space is how little self-knowledge of their own sexuality and physical functioning that men are presenting with. I think there's a real lack of information and education for men and people who have penises to actually know what that means even from a physical sort of point of view, and what some of the functions and cycles are of having a penis,
Hmm.
and having a penis engaging in sexual activity with people. So there's a lot of theme around what masculinity is, and feeling less masculine because they couldn't stay erect the whole time. Whereas in reality, the physicality of a penis is that it ebbs and flows over a period of arousal. So you will get erection and softening and hardening and softening over arousal. Whereas a lot of men, I think, as soon as they lose their erection, they get stuck in their head with this idea that suddenly they're less masculine and less of a man and they've failed, and all of this self-value and doubt and so forth comes. And so then actually getting an erection again after that becomes pretty difficult because you've gone into your
Into your
head,
head.
and you're reinforming, forcing some of those core beliefs you have perhaps. Whereas once they, I say to clients, this is a natural ebb and flow, a lot of them are like, wow, really? And they've never known that. So I think then understanding that can help you then to not be up in your head so much about it.
And I think that's because men don't talk about these things with each other. Women talk about things.
Yeah, I'm
And
not sure anyone talks about this stuff openly like that. Like
my group of people do. But I also found, when I was dating and then becoming intimate, men who were my age, and this was 4 years ago, um, men wouldn't talk about that. But I had, three encounters where it was they were very much in their head, and it was their past experience, and were embarrassed and didn't want to talk about it, even though, you know, I was very open to talking about it. They just did not want to talk about it. So, that made things very difficult.
Yeah, I think part of this as well is associated with what we might call like a cultural schema. You know, uh, um, the essence of how our culture tells this sort of narrative around what men are meant to be and what masculinity is meant to be and how your penis is meant to function. And that if
Mm,
you don't fit that schema, then the narrative says there's something wrong with you. And so, um, yeah, going into shame and not wanting to talk about those things is kind of the logical response to it if you don't have any other tools to deal with it.
yeah, yeah.
I think there's a lot of
And
complexity for men at the moment.
say
And
that again.
there's a lot of complexity for men at the moment to navigate this situation and navigate these things.
Yeah, yeah. Um, That leads us into the next question, which is vulnerability is a cornerstone of self-love and authentic connection. What advice would you give to someone just beginning to explore that space in their own life?
Um, well, keep exploring, first of all. Even if you don't believe that you're worthy to explore, that, push through some of those beliefs. And then if that stuff comes up, start to actually really look at that and see where that might be coming from, those beliefs. Um, I think that there's a lot of strengths in vulnerability, and we
Mm,
could change our perceptions around what being vulnerable means, and particularly for men. There's a kind of a narrative that men are weak if they're vulnerable, and in actual fact, I think it shows a lot of strength and
yeah,
fortitude to share of your heart and share of your thoughts and feelings and show your emotions. I think that this notion of strength being attached to kind of stoicism, I think has been very damaging for people. I think that constantly pushing our emotions away and pushing our emotions down and packing them aside, is just going to lead to a kind of explosion one day of that stuff and those emotions, and then be really out of control with it potentially. It's much better to, if you feel emotional, to feel emotional in the moment. And if that makes you feel vulnerable, to actually say that to someone and say, oh, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable right now because of these feelings. So there's a lot around communicating in our relationships and communicating with others, and then also communicating with ourselves if we have a feeling of emotion come up and start to feel vulnerable, but we're only with ourselves in the room to actually say, hey, that's actually okay. I'm okay, and it's okay for me to feel these things right now.
Is that where you encourage them to have that conversation with themselves out loud?
Um, Only if that works for the person.
Hmm.
I don't personally like having conversations with myself out loud. I don't even send people voice memos. I find it too weird. But the practice I do around self-love has some talking elements, which I was referring to.
Yeah.
But I'm going to keep that close to my chest because I want people to come and work with me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have those conversations out loud with myself because I can get out of my head. That works for me. And but I think that anybody, not just men, but I think anybody needs a safe space to feel vulnerable. Otherwise, they're going to shut down.
Yeah,
Mm. And and I think that when you have and tell me if you disagree, but when you have self-love and compassion for yourself, I think you can then have more for somebody else, have some compassion for somebody else, and allow them to be vulnerable.
absolutely. I
Mm,
think that self-love and growing self-love actually leads to having more empathy for people
mm.
and therefore more compassion for other people. I
Yeah.
saw this little like video meme the other day, which struck my core, and I thought, oh, that's something worth thinking about. And the person was talking about how we might say something like, what other people think doesn't matter. And that's a good way to look at it and go, okay, well, that person might be looking at me and thinking a certain thing, but really that what they think doesn't matter. And if you take on that model, then at some point, and this is what the person said, is you have to then actually go, well, actually, my thoughts don't matter. Because if theirs don't matter, neither do mine. So the negative thoughts I'm having about myself actually might not be the truth.
Mm,
That probably isn't the truth. And they probably don't matter that much. But we attach ourselves to them with a lot of weight sometimes as a
yeah.
finite truth or whole truth. And uh, yeah, taking on board that notion that their judgments don't matter, then actually to look back at yourself and go, well, do my judgments of myself matter? It's a good thing to think about.
Mm, yeah, thank you. Lastly, if people want to begin building whole person relationships, where's the first place they should start with others or with themselves?
Well, look, I was going to say they could jump on my website. That's the first place to start, isn't it? But no, I think really the first place to start is to be open and honest with your communication in relationships and
Yeah.
how you communicate. Be honest about what you want. I mean, I was just talking to my housemates about this in the last couple of months because they've started seeing someone. Um, and my housemate was dating a couple of people. And I was like, where do you want the relationship to go? What do you want from the relationship? And he told me what he wanted from the relationship. And I said, well, have you said that to the person that you're dating? He went, oh, I might, leave it for 3 or 4 dates. I'm like, but what if they don't want the same thing? Why would you wait 3 or 4 dates to find out they don't want the same thing when you already know what you want? Just tell them. Just tell them now. And if they don't want that, they're not a fit for your relationship. It's pretty
Yeah.
simple. If they do want that, then you can figure out how you might do that together, or if you might do that together, because they still might not be a fit for your relationship, or you might not be a fit for theirs. But at least you both know what it is you want.
Yeah.
So that being really open and honest with our communication with each other is the place to start.
And I
And
and
being
and I
open with yourself and honest with yourself about what you want.
yeah.
Take a bit of time to figure that out. If you're out dating or wanting to start a relationship or that sort of thing, really figure out what you want from those relationships.
It's just, and it's being able to have that authentic conversation, isn't it? Just a real conversation. That's what I love. That's why I have really loved this conversation. This chat with you has been really wonderful, and um, I just want to say thank you for sharing what you've shared. And you have such wonderful insights. And if listeners would like to get in contact with you, how do they reach you? What are all the ways that they can reach you, Toby?
Well, now you can actually go to my website. It's probably the best place to go, which is wholepersonrelationships.com, but it's whole-person-relationships.com.
And
A
I will
couple of
have
dashes
that
in because it
link.
makes it look better. There's a lot of letters there.
Yeah, yeah. But I will have
Yeah.
the link in the bottom of the podcast.
Right. Through the website, you can contact me directly. I've got a number of different forms there. I've got more elaborate story about my own diagnosis and what it's like to be an intersex person. And I've also got a link to my Instagram social media as well. So
Fantastic. So we will connect with you there, and even to ask Toby, questions about what what programs he has. So jump on there, and this will be up on my podcast for forever, and Toby can share that as well. And until next time, I thank you all for joining us once again, wherever you are in the world. Stay resilient, stay kind, and live a good life. Thank you so much.
thanks, Donna.